call to order the Morgantown Utility Board regular meeting for Tuesday, May 10th, 2022. In the read ahead, we had the minutes from the regular meeting of April 11th, 2022. And there's no corrections or deletions. I'd like a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of April 11th, 2022 as submitted.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve as submitted. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, minutes approved. Open up the meeting to the public. And since I don't see anybody in the audience, we can move on from that. New business, surplus property. Michael?
Yes, good evening. We have a list of surplus vehicles, equipment, and some other items that are no longer used and useful by the Morgantown Utility Board. And your list is included in the read ahead. And I recommend that we go ahead and put those up for auction and sell those items off.
Okay. So we need a motion to approve that.
I move we authorize the general manager and his designees to conduct an auction of the vehicles, equipment, materials that are no longer used by MUB as detailed in the attached list, which is a list to be attached to the minutes of this meeting.
I'll second.
Okay, motion and a second to authorize the special auction. Mike, so you'll put this in the paper? How will you do this?
Yes, we'll put it in the paper, and then we will have it online, so you can go and look at all the equipment that is for sale, and we list a brief description of some conditions, and you'll be able to go in and view that. And but there will be absolutely no test driving of vehicles. They are, you buy it as is. And
Can you inspect the vehicle?
yes, you certainly can come up and look at all the things that are available for the auction. You just won't be able to test drive any of the trucks.
When you say it'll be online, will it be on the MUB website or be on
Yeah.
something like GovDeals?
It'll be on our website.
Have you guys looked at GovDeals? And I'd say I'm interested possibly in having a pickup truck, and this could be hurting me, but GovDeals.com, it tends to bring in a lot of bidders. And I don't know what extra work it would entail, but they tend to bring good money in on vehicles.
Okay, we'll take a look at that.
Will you give 2 weeks notice or something? 2 weeks?
At least, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Yes.
Do we have other questions?
No.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, go for it, Mike.
Okay, the Coven Creek Reservoir Project, Kanawha Stone, they are on site working on the dam now. So that was a great sight to see. This weather this week, they're going to take advantage of it. So hopefully they're going to make good headway. And they've been working in the actual reservoir area and borrow area. It just now they're getting on top of the dam. So I think they estimate about 20 plus days to get up to the height ridge. And so just cross your fingers, we have good weather for a while.
Okay.
Wastewater treatment plant project, the punch list work is about 75% complete now. The plant is operating very efficiently. The staff is doing a wonderful job keeping everything in good operating condition. The staff really helped us get prepared for our visit from Senator Capito and Representative McKinley. I think those were very, very successful. We got an opportunity to talk about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program and how we were able to utilize the funds from that loan. Those loans rather to help with the construction of the plant and the benefit it is to us.
Yeah, they did a very nice job with the crew did a very nice job on the tour. Great.
Did you want to recognize the crew for the record?
Yeah, that's excuse me, Greg Shelatoad and Jacob Fischel and Ernie Utter, excuse me. They were our primary folks on leading the tour and getting things prepared.
Okay, thank you.
The Morgantown Industrial Park, as of April 30th, Green River, they've installed 3,875 feet of gravity sewer line, and the wet well for the main lift station on that side of the river. Of course, we have 2 crews working on bores. One crew is working on the SI property, the other is working to get underneath the Mon River, and they're progressing well, and so hopefully they'll be ready to get the pipe underneath the river this week. The Anderson Excavating, they're working on the water line. They've laid 2,735 feet. So they're almost complete, or they have completed the up on the pad where the new facility is being constructed, and they're working on installing the pipe from the booster station towards the water tank site. So they're making excellent progress.
Good news.
On the Upper Pocono Sanitary and Stream Restoration Project, we are still in the process of negotiating a contract with the prospective consultants for the project. And once we have completed the negotiations, we'll bring that contract back to the board for approval, and we'll also have the consultant come in and put on a presentation for the board so they can go over what will be accomplished in the contract.
Will we invite members of city council to attend that?
We certainly can to do that. We are waiting right now for the joint agreement with the county commission and the city and MUB for the ARPA funds. But certainly we welcome them to come and hear the presentation at that time.
And are you thinking this is something that would be able to wait for our next regular meeting, or do you think that a special meeting might be in the offing too? Because I want to make sure that once they're ready to go, that we aren't holding them up on approval of a contract just because we meet monthly.
I don't think waiting till next month would really hold them up anything significant, because once we know we're moving forward, I think they'll be able to kind of start. And it's hard to imagine any consultant's going to be able to just hit the ground running the very next day.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they'll have to have a little bit of time.
Okay. Westridge.
Okay, as you know, we've been working with West Ridge and other developers in the western end of the county, and we have had some engineering work completed by our consultant, E.L. Robinson, and they've identified about $13 million in upgrades to both the MUB's water system and wastewater system that need to be upgraded in order for more of the development to continue in that part of the county. And so as we looked at these costs, we realized these are going to be a real challenge to any developer or any one group. So we took the opportunity to submit an application with Senator Capito's office for consideration of a congressionally directed spending grant. Well, that is another way to put it. Yeah, exactly. But this is, I believe, is a project that is certainly worthy of one of that kind of a grant, and it's very beneficial to all of Mon County.
Okay, Mike.
Okay, with the office renovations, we have completed the ranking, and we're getting ready to start the process of the contract negotiations with the top-ranked firm. And again, once we have completed that, we'll come back to the board of directors with the contract, and then we'll also invite the architects to come in for a presentation.
Okay.
Clay Park, we had a meeting with city manager last week, and so we expect to see some agreements come through anytime on the trails and the trees. I think the bridge is still not decided upon, but we will be working with the city engineer's office and assisting them with the bridge. And I don't know that any particular bridge has been decided upon at this time, but we'll be working with them.
Okay.
Okay, we've been talking about the flood control study. So we have selected Strand Associates to be our engineer on this project. So this evening we have Scott Stearns. He's one of the principals with Strand, and he's going to talk to the board about how they believe that we will best approach this project and the contract.
Okay. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much, board members. I appreciate the opportunity. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Great. Okay, so I think starting off, just understanding the magnitude of prior rainfall events. If you look at the top kind of triangular piece there, that shows hourly rainfall events. So it goes all the way at the 1 year event from 1 inch per hour all the way up to greater than 3 inches per hour. So, and then if you look, you'll see the 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 year, 50, 100. So we would typically categorize everything in the less than 10 year events. Those would be what we call more smaller rainfall events. Anything bigger than 10 year, a 10 year recurrence interval event, it would be a larger event. So interestingly enough, there were 2 100-year, greater than 100-year recurrence interval events that happened June 13th and July 29th. So that would have been the time to buy the lottery ticket, right? Because you just broke the odds. So when you look at the typical storm sewer design is based on a 10 to 25 year design recurrence interval. So that's the sort of storm that it typically will handle from a duration, from a sizing. It's very unusual for it to be greater than that. In my career, I've never seen a storm sewer that was designed to handle a 100-year storm. Things would just get so large. The smaller events, if you're trying to convey that stormwater for the smaller events, that's typically for water quality purposes. That's a water quality. You're capturing those pollutants and you're getting them to where you want to put them. Anything in that 10 to 25 years is usually flood mitigation. So it's those higher storm events that are typically flood. So I think this shows. Obviously you experienced this, twice last year, and you saw major flooding that occurred, and I think this identifies that it was occurring in events greater than 100 year. Next slide, please. So the rainfall events impacted many different locations. These are photos taken either by MUB staff or by concerned citizens. Stewart Street and Idlewood, Dogwood Avenue, Windsor Avenue and Muncie, Valley View at Burroughs. So there was significant flooding, which resulted in significant property damage for those homeowners. Next slide, please. Rainfall events also impacted major roadways in multiple locations. Pattison Drive, Van Voorhees at Chestnut, Willowdale and Valley View Avenue. All of those areas had significant flooding. You can see on the far right hand, Willowdale and Valley View, somebody's sitting on top of their car trying to figure out how to get out of that. So that was, obviously a pretty significant event, and it impacted a lot of people in the city. Next slide. So one of the first things that we did is we got records from MUB, and they collected data from people that called in and said they had issues. So either people calling in or MUB staff noticing it themselves and documenting it. So all the red dots are basement flooding. And so typically a basement flooding would be an issue, if they're in the combined sewer area, that basement flooding is a result of the combined sewer system being overwhelmed, and it needs to go someplace, and so that hydraulic grade line gets so high that it will actually backflow into people's basements. And then the blue dots are overland flooding. The gold outline, it's hard to see, at least for me, the gold outline is the limits of your MS4 area where MUB is required to provide treatment for stormwater in the area. And then just identified that Burroughs Run and Pocono Run were two areas that were both impacted. So June 13th had about 100 events logged, and the July 29th there was about 150 logged events between basement backups and overland flooding. So next slide, please. So structures located within the 100-year floodplain. The graphic shows the blue lines, the blue solid lines. That's the 100-year floodplain. So FEMA puts out documents where they identify, based on their records, based on their modeling, where they think it's going to flood if there was a 100-year flood event that happens. And so, and they say something different, and it says 1% change, which is a 100-year flood, recurrence interval event that happened to happen back-to-back months last summer. So if you explore kind of what this graphic says is that there are many of the, I'd say all the are within that 100-year flood event, and those are dots that are properties that are within that 100-year floodplain. Excuse me. So there's several dozens of structures within that 100-year floodplain, and so while I'm meaning no disrespect for anybody, the system kind of responded the way you would expect it to respond. We saw a 100-year flood event, and what resulted was flooding that kind of stayed within those boundaries of what the FEMA maps predicted. So good for FEMA that they've identified and appropriately modeled things. So I think that's it on that slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So one of the things that the available infrastructure and data gap analysis. So this shows the information that MUB was able to share with us based on their storm system. So the yellow triangles are outfalls. There's some box culverts, big box culverts that exist typically under streets. Green is a storm sewer, and again the boundary of the MS4 line. So the first thing that happens as a part of a study like this would be system connectivity. We need to understand where the storm sewers go, where storm sewers are, how they're connected, both to each other and also to you have a combined sewer system. So the combined sewer is sanitary sewage and stormwater running together, we need to understand that. We need to understand the pipe diameters, how deep the pipes are, where there's inlets, and there's a bunch of different information that is required to be able to provide this first phase of the project. Next slide, please. So the recommended flood control includes a two-phase approach. It's difficult to say right now exactly what it is that needs to happen in Morgantown to fix the issue, to quote unquote fix the issue, because part of the effort to determine what fixes the issue is a political discussion about, okay, well, what's the level of service? What is expected? What does everybody expect the system to do, and how should it perform? And so we do a flooding location and characterization review. That's a fancy way of saying we identify the root cause of the issue. We identify potential flooding areas or potential study areas. The plan here isn't to look everywhere, because there wasn't a problem everywhere, right? There was problems in specific spots. So to the extent that we need to understand the entire system to answer the question in those specific areas, we're going to do that. But we're not going to try to fix a problem that's not a problem. There's obviously site visits and field measurements, drainage area delineations, conveyance capacity. There'll be a planning level storage analysis, so storage of essentially various rainfall events. And then an identification of any additional data that's required for the phase 2. So this is, and it would wrap up in a technical memo. So I think you've got an agreement or a task order in your packets that you could read more about this scope if you'd like. The estimated fee for this first phase is $40,000, and we anticipate it would take 3 to 4 months to complete. Next slide, please. So phase 1 will consider multiple initial priority study areas. So we've identified some preliminary thoughts by talking with MUB staff. These are very preliminary. I don't want anybody to feel like, well, the area I'm really interested isn't identified in there. If that's the case, well, then we'd want to know about it, and we can adjust. This is preliminary. But there was kind of two different things that were looked at. One was, combined sewer, basement backups, area flooding. Those are two things, and there was certain homeowner groups or neighborhoods that were vocal about the flooding that was going on in their area, and those are areas that we want to understand. But again, preliminary, I think, is the key word here as far as study areas. So next slide, please. Recommended flood control study, the second phase. So this is the remainder of the project, and so there's a lot of different things that could go into this thing, but one is just to make sure that we've got all the data, all the physical data, both topographically and also connectivity wise. That will be helpful. That this information will be turned over to MUB to be able to have and to use from here on forward, right? It'll be good information for MUB to have and own. There's the potential for detailed stormwater modeling that would be done, and I'll talk more about modeling in the next presentation. But that's a definite possibility. And really, what we'd be looking at would be identifying various projects to be able to meet the level of service that's agreed to, and then figure out what those projects look like. Dream these projects up, and then come up with a potential cost associated with those projects. And then I think there's kind of this
there's probably this iterative step, right? I mean, you might say, hey, I want this level of service, and then, you know, we go back into our caves and, you know, start looking and developing costs and ideas, and all of a sudden we come out and it's like, well, that's just not doable. And so maybe that's okay. Well then, you know, what if it's this level of service? There'd be meetings with stakeholders in the community based on, you know, obviously we'd be following MUB's lead on that, Michael and his staff. So those are things that are kind of typically cooked into these studies, and you know, we want to hear from people, typically. And then the final documentation would be a flood control study, a total flood control study to mitigate flooding, and to provide a level of service that's consistent with what, you know, with that tension of what's desirable and what's affordable. So I think that's, next slide please. I think that's okay. Yes, okay, thank you. Last slide. What are some of the things that could be used to control flooding? You know, it could be a new storm system that would be, you know, larger additional storm sewer piping, larger conveyance. You know, you can imagine what it would take to take all the water that was on those roadways and move it to one of your local waterways. I mean, it'd be some large infrastructure. So, you know, you've got, so those are some of the things that we would be looking at, you know, again, based on the level of service that is recommended or decided upon with MUB staff. You know, maybe there's some enhanced maintenance activities that could be used by MUB staff. I don't know. Maybe there's some property acquisitions, you know, using FEMA funds. You know, sometimes that's what's done in, you know, in areas that are, you know, prone to hurricanes or flooding or any other natural disasters. You know, FEMA they want people to typically not live there anymore, and to move them out and put them someplace that they'd be safe. Develop a list of flood reduction projects with opinion of probable cost. Achieve public and stakeholder support of this prioritized list of projects, and you know, develop an overall plan. I think I've said that before, and I think, you know, I can say without a doubt the take home here is it's going to be flood mitigation. It will not be flood elimination. There is always a storm that nature can give us that we're not able to handle with built infrastructure. So that's the end of the flooding study. So I don't know would you like to lead question and answer? Would you like me to, Michael?
Yeah, we'll let the board, if they have any questions, and then to move forward with the agreement.
Well, the presentation deals specifically with MUB and its infrastructure. But there are other contributing factors that are more controlled by other entities.
Okay.
How are we integrating that consideration?
Rich, would you like to?
Sure. Yeah, I'm assuming we're talking about DOH and WVU, who all have systems that intermingle with ours, and certainly they would play a large role in the upfront phase one, understanding the system. I think what he showed was what we could give him very quickly, and they haven't started the project yet, and so this was just kind of an entry thing. But I think the first phase of it, understanding the system, doesn't mean just ours.
Okay.
Right.
It means every contributing factor to flooding. So certainly they would have to have a major
And we have been in contact with both the DOH and WVU. We've been having discussions with both of those entities rather.
And we currently, we have a scheduled meeting monthly or every other month. I think it's monthly with both parties already. And so we would anticipate that flow of information to be pretty smooth.
Are they gonna contribute to the cost of the study as well?
We haven't asked for on the phase 1 study, but I think once we start identifying some of the larger projects and things to be done, I think absolutely we would be looking for more of a partnership on that end for contributing.
Why have you not asked?
Well, we've talked about it, but we don't have we haven't come to them with an exact number of, would you participate at this particular level. With the phase 1, it's so much of it's unknown at this point, but we would certainly think about it. Phase 2 is going to have to involve all of us. I mean, we're too
Absolutely.
interconnected.
$40,000 is not a lot of money, but their buy-in is important, and perhaps their buy-in from the beginning is important.
We feel like that we've got really good partners now. I mean, as we move forward, and the communication, the monthly meetings are helping, and quite possibly we'll be able to cost share. It's just in this first phase, we saw it as, okay, this is pretty reasonable. Let's get this thing moving, and so we can start getting something more definitive on paper.
I think that's good, because somebody has to start it, and since most people think of the problem being ours, it's a good place to start.
Yeah.
And that'll help identify, but phase 1,
Yeah.
what other contributing factors we have,
Yeah.
who else we need to deal with, so.
I think, each of the entities have challenges here. Old infrastructure, it's people aren't big on putting dollars into things you can't see. And that's what we have at MUB. Most of what we have is underground, you can't see it, but we have to maintain it and take care of it, and so does the DOH and WVU.
And WVU's got its own set of budget issues from the pandemic, so it might be a little challenging to get more out of them. I don't know.
One of the things you mentioned, Scott, in your presentation was the number of structures currently inside the 100-year floodplain.
Yes, sir.
I forget, please forgive my ignorance, but do we know, and county-wise, they're working on subdivision regulations. There is not zoning or permitting requirements in the county, but in the city, is there anything that would prohibit folks from building structures inside the 100-year floodplain, or is that something that's you'll need to get in a little further before knowing?
That's an answer I don't know. Truth be told, I'm not the proposed project manager on this project. There's actually another gentleman from our office, John Lyons, who, because I was coming, I'm giving this presentation. He may know, and Michael, you and Rich, or you guys may know as well, as far as is there a zoning issue in Morgantown? I'm not aware of it.
I know from in previous states that I've been in, where we were in West Lafayette, Indiana, and all of Tippecanoe County, building in the 100-year floodplain was verboten, and the Area Plan Commission
Yep.
started beating a drum about the 500-year floodplain,
Yeah.
which would have eliminated about half the city.
Yeah.
And then also when I was in Lexington, Kentucky, they started a program buying up properties that were already in the floodplain, including, I went to a press conference that I parked at my house. It was a little disturbed by, right around the corner, was where they were going to tear down some homes because there's a lot of water displacement that occurs in the floodplains. I know we're talking about aged infrastructure, but part of the design of these programs is so that the water has somewhere to go that isn't necessarily in pipes until it can start
Right.
getting into those pipes. So I think
Right.
that is to use a cliche, that's a lot of low-hanging fruit.
Right.
To be able to not have so much water displaced.
Yeah.
And at the very least ensure no more gets displaced.
Right.
As 100 years become 6 weeks.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you do have the issue of existing properties. I think as a part of this, we'd want to have a conversation with city zoning folks and just understand what their position is when somebody comes and tries to, get something built in that 100-year floodplain. I'm just not sure.
We'd have to have that same conversation with the university, because they tend to do whatever they want regardless of zoning. Any other capacity.
Well, I think the study is going to reveal where we will need to have some legislation or policies
Yeah.
At the city level and the county level. And
Yes.
that's a big unknown.
Yes.
I mean, we've had studies done before, but not like this.
Right.
And so this will enable people to come up with the serious
It'll drive.
ways to address
Yep.
some of these things.
Yep.
And not until the study's done, really.
Right. But it could drive some policy for sure.
Definitely.
Well, and though universities enjoy a type of sovereignty that other entities do not, one of the things that I know happens once you start identifying in FEMA, if they decide to expand floodplains, the first people that find out about it aren't necessarily the property owners, but their insurance companies. So that tends to be, it tends to be prohibitive to, regardless of who you are, to be able to build in a floodplain
Yeah.
moving forward if you want to have insurance for the property you've built.
Okay. Do you have any questions?
No, I do not.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to move to approve the bid and award a contract to Strand Associates for Phase 1 of the flood control study in the base amount of $40,000, and to further authorize the general manager to sign all documents related to said contract.
Second.
Okay, excuse me. Motion and a second to approve the bid from Strand Associates for Phase 1 of the flood control study. Additional questions on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, move forward. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
You might as well stay where you are.
Okay.
Very nice.
Scott's gonna have he's here to also give a second presentation to the board on the long-term control plan hydraulic modeling that we have to get accomplished. We're now at that point with our new sewer plant, or I guess upgraded sewer plant, where we need to do the modeling to know how much of the capture we're getting out of our CSOs. The long-term control plan, I think our last one was submitted in 2014 and that time, and so they have to be updated. And last year, we completed the flow measurements. Rich, you can help me fill in the blanks here. I think we had every CSO was being monitored.
Right, we had flow meters in 70 locations, so all of our CSOs plus throughout the system for about 8 months.
Yeah.
So, that is, and both of these events were also in that time period that we were just discussing. So now that data has been collected. COVID put us behind schedule. We had waited about a year before we actually moved forward with the flows, with actually measuring the flows. But now we have the data. We're ready to start with the modeling and for the updated long-term control plan. Now this won't include the long-term control plan. This is just for the modeling that has to be accomplished. And Scott will go into more detail about what is going to be done and that cost.
Great, thank you, Michael. So, yeah, I'm kind of summarizing about 20 years of work in 15 or 16 slides. So, please stop me if I use jargon. I hate it when people use jargon, so I really try not to. So next slide, please. Next. Great. So the MUB interceptor pumping stations and force mains, this just shows an outline of your major infrastructure. So you do have a combined sewer system. So, you know, that means that during dry weather, all the flow goes to the wastewater treatment plant. During wet weather, storm flows share the pipe with sanitary sewer flows. And so there are some times when there is a combination of stormwater and untreated sanitary sewage that makes its way to some of the area waterways. That does not happen in dry weather, though. So you see the wastewater treatment plant right along the Mon River and various pumping stations. Your major collection system runs up Deckers Creek, and where there's areas of CSOs. So next slide, please. So CSS, so combined sewer system, CSO, combined sewer overflow frequencies. The dots show, again, this is along the Monongahela River, and then up Deckers Creek, and then along Burroughs Run. So that's primarily where you have your overflows right now. So you have 40 permitted overflows. MUB is within their right to discharge, and we're in a that part of the deal is that there's a long-term control plan, and so that plan is meant to have it's a long-term plan because they know it's going to be large infrastructure required to control overflows to a certain amount. So 40 permitted overflows. CSOs 9, 13, and 16 were plugged, but they're still permitted right now. Those were plugged actually back in 1999. And then CSOs 8, 27, and 32 were eliminated as well and removed from the permit. So this is overflow data from previously. And one of the things I'm most interested in looking at is, okay, here's the overflow kind of histogram that's happening here. Let's see how the work that's been done over the last 20 years impacts that. And it's going to make it better, but it's not going to get the board all the way to controlling CSOs to enough that you can say we're done. Next slide, please. So I just want to kind of go through some of the history here. So in 1994, before 1994, CSOs were not regulated. In 1994, there was a CSO regulation, and one of the tenets of that was that communities needed to develop a long-term control plan. And so there's been lots of communities all over the United States, especially in Indiana, that have spent a lot of money to control their CSOs to some endpoint that they and the regulators have agreed to is enough. So in 1999, between 1999 and 2002, MUB began this CSS characterization. So it was kind of what we're doing with the stormwater system. All right, what pipes are in the ground? How big are they? What's the slope? What's the connectivity? And there was a lot of different things that were discovered back during those 3 years when that was done. So there was flow metering that was done, there was modeling that was done, and there was alternatives that were developed that allowed the CSOs to be controlled to an appropriate level. So next slide, please. So then 2002, MUB submits their original long-term control plan. There was also river sampling that was done as well during that study. And then 2002 to 2009, MUB began implementing what was called early action items. And these early action items were things that MUB identified and Strand identified as, okay, these make sense. These projects make sense. And what we were focusing on were projects that needed to be done anyway, but would also help the situation. A lot of your system is old And, you know, we don't, as a consultant, we don't want to get MUB into a situation where, you know, you've spent all this money to control CSOs, and you do a great job on that, but the rest of your system that treats wastewater 24/7, now there's big liabilities there that you're not addressing. So that's what happened 2002 to 2009. 2009 to 11, those early action projects were done, and MUB submitted a long-term control plan update. And then in 2014, there was a little change of direction, and I think that was, you know, direction that, all right, we really want to identify. There was a major plant upgrade that was required, and MUB looked at that and said, all right, we want to accomplish that first. Once we accomplish that, we'll have additional capacity at the plant, and we'll be able to treat additional flows. Let's do that first, and then figure out where to go next. Next slide. So what's in that 2014 long-term control plan? Let's open it up. Next slide. So this is a summary of all phases. So this was a long-term control plan that culminated. There was 4 phases that were part of that long-term control plan. And so the control level that we identified was 85% capture. So what that means is that when if all the wet weather flow that falls, you know, within your sewer shed, 85% of that gets to the wastewater treatment plant and gets treated. And the 1994 CSO documents say, okay, that's one way that you can get to an endpoint, and that is a one method to comply with the regulations. So a phase plan was implemented. I'm not going to go through all this, but you know, all the red squares and green triangles and big bold lines, those are, you know, pumping station and treatment modules and big pipes. A lot of different infrastructure was identified here, and particularly, you know, reinforcing the conveyance capacity not only along the Mon, but also down Deckers Creek and in Burroughs and Pocono Run. Next slide, please. Okay, so your board members, you're going right to the very bottom line. I know you. So the far, if you look, there's certain parts of the project that's complete. So group 1 is complete. So that consisted of the treatment plant, Pocono Run, and Central Mon grit removal. 2, 3, and 4 have not been completed. So that is currently, if you pull that into today's dollars, is about $122 million. In addition to the affordability that is associated with that 122, there's also you know, just normal CIP projects that MUB needs to do, and so those were baked into this whole thing as well. So the report stated that only Group 1 and the CIPs, the capital improvement plan items, were affordable in the planning horizon to 2040. Now, whether DEP agrees with that or not is to be seen, because they have not approved the 2014 plan. I think they've acknowledged receipt. So I'll take the next slide, please. So the way DEP has written this, they've written a letter back, and what they say is that the agency continues to coordinate the review and the finalization of the long-term control plan with the city. So on one hand, you say, okay, I'd rather have the long-term control plan approved. On the other hand, there's some flexibility associated with them saying, well, you tell us when you want to change something, and we'll consider it. So that's been the relationship that MUB has had with West Virginia DEP over the last few years, and I don't think it's the worst thing to be in that situation. you've got flexibility, you've got the ability to kind of drive your own, or chart your own course, for lack of a better term. Next slide, please. So why is an upgrade, or why is an update required to the long-term control plan? So one is we want to take credit. We want to help MUB take credit for the work that you've done. There's been improvements. There's additional capacity. We want to be able to demonstrate that and share that with DEP. We want to be able to affirm MUB's long-term control plan strategy. We've had this conversation that the direction of the long-term control plan was charted by people that are no longer sitting in this room. And so we want to make sure that this is the direction that is still the direction that is. And these are going to be major infrastructure projects, and if that man right there in the red shirt isn't shaking his head up and down thinking this is a good idea, it's not a good idea. And so we want to make sure that there's some time to get everybody on the same page. And then the last thing is supporting a request for more time. So the long-term control plan does two things. One part of the long-term control plan says, okay, how are you gonna, what are you gonna control to? And then the next thing it says is, okay, well, when are you gonna be done? So, yeah, so we want to be able to take a breath and say, okay, there is a major, largest wastewater treatment plant in the state that the project that you just completed at Star City, is a big project with a lot of, it's a great success, but it's also very expensive. And so we want to be able to take a breath. Ratepayers need to be able to, afford this, and there is definitely an affordability component to it. So anyway, right now it says that there's, the Group 2 projects are saying it's going to be done at the end of 2025. There is a footnote at the bottom of this thing that doesn't show up there, and what it says is MUB will do these projects. They've been identified. As long as there's grant or grant funding, MUB will gladly move forward with these projects, but they have not agreed to raising rates to be able to move forward with the projects. So, next slide. So again, system-wide modeling, as Mike identified, 69 meters were put in the ground, all CSOs. The overflows themselves were monitored, and the meters were installed for quite some time. Next slide, please. So the long-term control plan scope items. So, the goal of this whole exercise is to be able to develop a new long-term control plan. So, the collection system characterization, check mark, that's done. Hydraulic modeling and agency coordination, that's what we're talking about right now. Treatment and conveyance alternatives and preparation of the long-term control plan report itself. Those are two things that still need to be accomplished. So next, or click, please. All right, so phase 1 is identified here, and essentially there are, this is a modeling phase to be able to determine how well the system is performing, comparing it back to that 2002 report and flow values. We need to, and then we think that there's definitely a need to have agency coordination as well, and to make sure that everybody within MUB fully understands what the recommended plan was, so we can figure out where to launch to the future. So once the phase 1 is complete, next click please. There's a phase 2. Utilize the model to validate the long-term control plans and sizing, come up with costs, figure out, there is a ratepayer affordability component to this that is that's very important, and that has to do with you know, this long, you know, how much schedule is going to be allowed to complete the remainder of the work here. And then that gets wrapped up with a long-term control plan, and again, agency coordination, and to some degree, community coordination as well, and collaboration. Okay, next slide, please. So now it's my time to geek out here a little bit. So a dynamic model is going to be used to study the system. So some might call it a digital twin, whatever you want to call it. It's something that lives in electron space that matches what's going on in the actual real world. So we want to, next slide, please. Okay, so every manhole that that's in your system is a node, and so we make that a node, and then next click, please. The sewers in between those manholes become links, and then click. You know, the pumps or the weir overflows that control the amount of flow that goes either to the wastewater treatment plant or out to the river. Those are all modeled using what's called multi-links. And so everything that's in the ground gets modeled virtually. And the whole idea, could you click it again, please? Okay, so the whole idea is essentially when it rains, right? We want what actually happens in the system to be modeled, and we make that comparison, and we calibrate the model. And once we get that calibrated model, now we can start doing what ifs. Okay, you have an 18-inch and there's a problem in this area, 18-inch sewer in this area. What if we made it a 42-inch? Okay, 42-inch, you know, conveys all the flow, but now there's an issue downstream that, you know, it didn't used to get out here, and now it moves down to here, but we still haven't really solved the problem. And so, you know, there's usually a series of projects that all work together in concert to be able to meet, again, we're trying to meet the 85% capture. So sorry, I went off script. So the collection system calibration determines how much rainfall enters the system. So rainfall derived inflow and infiltration. Inflow is water that comes from a direct connect, a downspout going connected right to your sanitary sewer. That's an inflow spot. Infiltration is you've got a crack in your pipe, and as the ground starts to become saturated, water leaks in, but it's not really a direct connection. It's more of everything gets saturated, and then now all of a sudden this pipe starts to drain the ground instead of draining, you know, the waste that you were hoping it was going to do. So we look at this rainfall derived I&I, and we start, you know, turning knobs in the model to make sure that the amount of flow that hits this sewer shed actually gets into the sanitary system or the combined system. And we use the rainfall data that was collected, and then we calibrate the model. And so we come up with a let's click here. Let's see if is there a slide that I added? No, I didn't. Okay, so there is a you know, we try to mimic the response curve, and so we'll have a flow meter, and the flow meter says the flow goes like this. Well, if our model says the flow goes like this and it doesn't match it, we're like, okay, we need to tweak some knobs in the model so that they match, and we get the model so that it does a good job representing what actually happens. So last thing here is the model can quantify flows that leave the system, and they result in a CSO. So this just shows you know, what happens, and really this is a dynamic model, and if we're going to demonstrate that the system collects 85%, we will manufacture a year's worth of rainfall, kind of an average year's worth of rainfall event, run it through this model. So, you know, 365 days worth of rainfall goes through this thing, and we monitor and we say, okay, well, when do we get to 85%? We start adding projects in or taking projects out to hit various levels of control. Next slide, please. And that's it. I'm going to take a breath. Right, right. Maybe I can get my son to be interested.
I love all that stuff. I have my students do it a lot. It's a great way to learn.
Okay. Very, very informative. Any questions?
No, I really enjoy that. Getting that out.
Yeah.
Are we unique in West Virginia with DEP acknowledging receipt rather than approving our long-term plan?
Not completely, not completely unique. I mean, I can tell you, the situation you want to stay out of. You want to stay out of a situation where the only way you can change projects in your long-term control plan is that you have to go back and, talk in front of a judge. You don't want that, because you don't have much flexibility there.
I'm familiar with the national EPA
Yeah.
coming after cities with consent decrees back in the late aughts.
Right.
And that's
Right.
definitely not the situation you want to get in. And most of the time, if you actually showed up to meetings and showed an effort, that didn't occur.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's usually a board or a governing body that says, come and make me, and and they did, right? And they did, because in 1994, before 1994 it wasn't, and then it was, and then people needed to respond to that. MUB has a great reputation in the state and has the ability to, has a lot of clout with West Virginia DEP, and I think they're in a situation where there's a lot of trust and confidence in MUB to make progress and do the right thing, and that's what you've done over the time that I've known the organization. So, congratulations.
This process is very much parallel to what we did at the school board. You have a 10-year plan. You develop that plan, you send it in, then at the end of 10, or toward the end of 10 years, during the process, during that 10 years, you can upgrade it or update it. But then at the end of 10 years, go back and look, do exactly what phase 1, phase 2, check it off, what's next, update. And the state says, pretty much, thank you for sending it. We'd like to see how you're doing as you go along.
Okay, well, Michael, you have anything to add?
No, just that
Thank you.
it's a big project, it's a big undertaking.
It's time.
Yeah,
It's
it
time.
seems
It's all
reasonable because we're at about the 2-decade horizon of the first one, and while it was a 40, 50-year plan, just because that's what we decided 20 years ago we're going to do for the next 50 doesn't mean that we know now what we need to do for the next 30. What we said then works still now. Right.
And things change so much over time. Forecasting is only as good as everything stays constant.
Right.
And the minute something changes, forecasting changes.
Right.
So.
Well, and weather forecasting, as we know, calls a 100-year event something that happens in a 6 weeks period. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Scott.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
So I move to approve the bid from and award contract to Strand Associates for the long-term control plan hydraulic modeling in a base amount of $300,000, to authorize the general manager to use monies from MUB's reserve fund to pay the contract price, and to further authorize the general manager to sign all documents related to said contract.
Second.
okay, motion and a second to approve the bid from Strand Associates for the long-term control plan hydraulic modeling, base amount of $300,000. Additional questions on the motion?
Yeah, and I didn't ask this question before. The term base amount, is there a not to exceed, or what are we? What does base amount mean as far as?
Well, we believe that in working with Strand, that will be the cost. We try not to put a do not exceed, because sometimes during the process, just like phase 1 of the flood control study, things can occur that we need to be aware of and that may, that weren't foreseen. And it just like, there's so many unknowns that can occur, we just wanted to make sure that both entities have the ability to sit down at the table and discuss it.
And if there are substantive changes, substantive constant cost increases, you'll come back to us first.
Yes.
Works for me.
Work for you, Jeff?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Approved. Okay, we'll move on to general manager's report.
Okay, Baird Street, I call that the gift that keeps on giving. We had hoped for some the tie-in to happen this week, but we have fallen victim to the supply chain problems. And so we are waiting, I believe, on a T to show up. And the T has not arrived and is not likely to until maybe the end of this week, hopefully early next week. But we do have agreements in place with Xylem for the pumps that we will need to do a pump around, make the tie-ins occur. So we are prepared, we're just now waiting for the material. As far as the retaining wall that Alpha Associates is designing for us at this time, they need some more borings completed, but we need to move the one contractor out to move the drill rig in. So we are confined in our space there. So once that occurs, they'll be able to go in and we'll be able to make more progress. Rich, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, that's good.
Okay.
Let's see, the Delegate Hanson, you may know that the legislative interims will be held here in Morgantown, and Delegate Hanson has contacted MUB and asked if they could have a tour of the Star City wastewater treatment plant. So it is becoming a destination place here in Morgantown.
Good to know.
And
See our
so,
wastewater plant.
so May the 22nd, that afternoon, they're going to come down around 3:15. I don't know how we get the 15 in there, but 3:15 in the afternoon, and the State Water Resources Committee will come, I believe is going to come. Members of the Infrastructure Committee are going to attend as well. And so we'll try to break them up in maybe 2 smaller groups and have another tour. And you are very welcome to come down and be a part that afternoon and go through the plant and see everything. Or we can have another scheduled date anytime you'd like, because it is pretty interesting. Greg does an excellent job with the tour. That is his jam, as they say.
And just to confirm, it's Sunday, May 22nd? Or
23rd.
I'm sorry, Monday the 23rd.
Okay.
I apologize.
That's okay.
Yeah,
It's actually preferred.
Okay.
I did have one thing
Sure.
to add. We are going to need to have a special meeting. We had a bid opening, and we were not able to get it onto the agenda. And we have a bid opening for a couple projects, and we'd like to try to have that. We can do that by Zoom. Either have that Monday or Tuesday of next week. I think both of those dates will work, as long as we can get the notice out and the agenda out tomorrow. Correct.
Yep.
So we.
So just the one topic.
Yeah, there's two bids.
2 bids.
One's for phase of Autumn Ridge and a water line bore under University. We're gonna put a new water line in. We had a water main burst over there, and water got into McDonald's and BFS, and so we're gonna put a new line in.
Okay.
So if that works with your all schedule, we can do it. We can do it first thing in the morning.
I have 2 immovable meetings, I'll send you the times.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some limitations also.
I think I can work around it.
Yeah, I should be able to work around as well.
Monday's free, but Tuesday.
Normally I can move things around, but these two.
Okay, well, let Karen and Barb can let you know, and then
Yeah.
we'll figure it out.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay, well, thank you, Michael. We can move on to board member issues or discussions, anything you'd like to bring up to the staff? If not, we will move on to executive session. We need a motion to move to executive session.
I move to convene an executive session of the Board of Directors under the provisions of West Virginia Code 6-9A-4B2A to discuss personnel issues and to discuss legal issues pursuant to West Virginia Code section 6-9A-4B12. And further move that the May 10th, 2022 regular meeting of the Board of Directors be adjourned at the conclusion of the executive session.
Second?
Second? Motion and second to move to executive session, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, who do we need, Mike?